Jesus calms the storm. One evening, Jesus and his disciples were walking by the Sea of Galilee. It had been a beautiful day and the orange ball of the sun was sinking low in the sky. Understanding the story. Located in a basin bordered by mountains, the Sea of Galilee is known for its sudden storms. Jesus orders the wind and waves to return to calm, and they obey him. The disciples see for themselves that he is able to control even the powerful forces of nature. They are in awe of his abilities, and their faith grows stronger. The waters were calm and tranquil, and the fishermen were preparing for the night ahead. "Come, let us go to the other side," said Jesus. They climbed into their little fishing boat, the disciples took the oars, and they sailed out to sea. A gentle breeze tickled the water, and soon Jesus had fallen asleep, lulled by the rocking motion of the boat. The disciples looked at him and smiled at each other. On and on they rowed, and they were far out at sea when, without warning, the sky darkened. A sudden violent wind appeared from nowhere, whipping the waters into gigantic waves. Water crashed down onto the little boat, threatening to swamp it. Jesus was still fast asleep in the stern of the boat. "Master, Master, wake up! Save us! We are going to drown!" the disciples shouted, shaking him. Jesus opened his eyes and got to his feet, holding the side of the boat. He lifted his arm above the sea, which raged below, and said to the waves, "Quiet! Be still!" Immediately the waters calmed and the wind dropped. The Sea of Galilee lay flat once more. The disciples looked at each other, pale with fear and amazement. How great is he! Even the winds and the water obey him. Christ Stilling the Tempest by Danish painter Anker Lund, 1840 to 1922. The Possessed Man. Jesus and the disciples crossed the sea and landed in the country of the Gadarenes. As they stepped out of the boat, a man rushed up to Jesus, screaming and gibbering. Assyrian demon. In the Bible, evil spirits called demons are shown as being in league with Satan against God. At the time of Jesus, it was believed that demons could possess people, causing disease and mental illness. This statue depicts an Assyrian demon. Monastery. At the spot where Jesus released the demons from the disturbed man are the ruins of a Byzantine monastery. The site in Kherson was discovered in 1967 during excavations for a new road. The man was bleeding, with cuts on his arms and legs. His wrists and ankles were bound in chains, and his torn clothes were filthy. He was possessed with demons and had lived among the tombs of the dead for years, terrifying anyone who came near. He fell at Jesus' feet, clutching at his robes with blackened hands. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torture me." "What is your name?" asked Jesus politely. "My name is Legion," he replied, "because I have so many demons inside me." Jesus listened and looked at the huge herd of pigs rooting around on the hillside that led down to the sea. "Be off," he said to the demons possessing the wild man. "Go and find a new home. Go to the pigs. There are plenty of them, at least 2,000. Leave this man in peace." Obediently, the evil spirits swarmed out of the man toward the herd. They possessed the pigs like a terrible virus. The creatures squealed and shivered. Then they charged down the hill. They ran to the edge of the cliff and straight over it and into the sea below. They plunged under the water and drowned. The astonished herdsmen who had been looking after the pigs rushed off to tell everyone. Naturally, people came to have a look, but when they arrived, all they saw was a normal man sitting at Jesus' feet, talking quietly, and not a pig in sight. People were confused by what they saw. They asked Jesus and his disciples to leave. As they left, the man who had been cleansed of his demons begged to go with them, but Jesus turned to him and said, "Go home and tell everyone what God has done for you." Understanding the story. The demons inside the possessed man recognized Jesus' power and did as he asked of them. Jews believed that pigs were the dirtiest of animals, so when the pigs drown, it is symbolic of the removal of the man's uncleanliness. Those who benefit from Jesus' miracles want to stay with him, but Jesus asked the man to spread the news of God's mercy. Jairus' daughter. Jesus got back to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and a crowd was waiting for him on the shore. Place of worship. Dating from the 3rd century CE, the synagogue in Baram, Galilee, is much more elaborate than the simple synagogue run by Jairus. As head of the synagogue, Jairus would have maintained the building and organized religious services. Mourning music. Public displays of grief were the usual response when someone died. It was customary for musicians to play haunting and sorrowful pieces during the week-long period of mourning. The reed pipe was one of the instruments played at this time because of its high-pitched wailing sound. One of the leaders of the synagogue, a very important man named Jairus, came up to him in a terrible state. He fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house. His only daughter, a little girl of 12 years old, lay there dying. As Jesus went with Jairus through the crowd, he was jostled and squashed by people trying to get near him. Among them was a woman who had been ill for many years, suffering from bleeding. She had tried everything, but nothing stemmed the flow. "If only I can touch his cloak, I will be healed," she said to herself. She inched herself toward him, weaving her way through the crowd, and finally got near enough to touch the edge of his cloak with her fingers. At once, her bleeding stopped and she was released from her suffering. Jesus stopped in his tracks and turned around. "Who touched me?" he asked. People shook their heads, denying it was them, and the disciples said, "Master, there are so many people crowding around you. How can you ask who touched you?" But Jesus kept turning his head and looking around to see who it was. Eventually the woman bowed down before him, trembling with fear, and told him the truth. "Daughter," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While he was speaking to the woman, some men came to Jairus with bad news. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher any more? There is no point in him coming with you now." But Jesus ignored them. "Don't be afraid," he told Jairus. "Just believe and she will be healed." And he continued on his way to the house, taking only 3 of his disciples with him, Peter, James, and John. As they approached, they could see the flautists playing music for the dead and the people outside weeping and sobbing. "Why all this commotion and wailing?" Jesus asked. "The child is not dead but asleep." But the mourners did not believe him. He and the disciples went into the house with Jairus and his wife. Their daughter was lying on her bed, cold and still. Jesus bent over her and took her small hand in his. "Little girl," he said softly, "I say to you, get up." Her eyelashes fluttered and opened and she smiled. Then she stretched and yawned and jumped off the bed and ran to her parents. Astonished, they clutched her tightly to them and looked at Jesus in amazement. He gave them strict instructions not to tell anyone what had happened, and he told them to give her something to eat. Jesus cures a woman of bleeding in the 6th century CE mosaic in Ravenna, Italy. Understanding the story. Jesus heals both the suffering woman and the sick girl in response to their faith. Though the woman's illness has condemned her to a life of loneliness, the belief that contact with Jesus will cure her is rewarded. While Jairus knows his daughter has passed away, Jesus reminds him to have faith, and she returns to life. Faith is stronger than death.